acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land tonight, the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, and acknowledge elders past and present, and also remind the meeting that it is being audio-visually recorded and will be available on the internet later this week to watch. Thank you. Declare meeting open, and note we have a full house, therefore no apologies. Item 2, confirmation of minutes for 15th of March and for the special meeting on the 21st of March. As circulated, be taken as read and understood. Alderman Pearce, Alderman Roberto. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 3, I'd like to record in the please the sad passing of Councillor A. Church, who was a councillor on several occasions in the past before the Clarence municipality was awarded city status, and thank Alderman Pearce for representing us at the funeral. Thank you. Item 4, that Council notes the workshops on the 21st of March, 4th of April, and the agenda brief on the 8th of April. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Seconded, Alderman Cusick. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate. There being none. Item 6, tabling of petitions. General Manager.
Mr Mayor, this evening I have a petition from 231 signatories requesting a planning scheme amendment to change the zoning of the Rosny Hill Recreation, which is currently zoned recreation, to environmental management zone. I'll table that.
Thank you. Are there any other petitions? Thank you. Item 7, public question time. Item 7.3, we have an answer to a previous question taken on notice. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The intersection of Julie Street and Boatta Road is currently controlled by few sign markings with road priority to the Boatta Road traffic. Crash reports have been checked for the intersection of Boatta and Malunna Roads, and it was found that 2 crashes had been reported. Out of these 2 crashes, one was property damage and the other required some first aid treatment. Both of those crashes were caused from failing to give way. Stop signs are installed at intersections where the sight lines are compromised. An inspection of the intersection revealed that the required sight lines conform to the relevant standards for give way control and hence do not require additional control or change, such as stop signs. The parking behaviour on both streets was found to be compliant and does not compromise the intersection safety. A large number of vehicles associated with a property in Malunna Road are parked on the street. However, this does not create a significant safety risk to the intersection. Parked vehicles provide an informal measure of traffic calming on a residential street, and interrupted traffic flow is a typical character of residential street traffic. Intersection markings are faded and need repainting. Council will include this intersection as part of the next round of line marking works soon to be submitted to the Department of State Growth, and the stormwater issue has been passed to Council's stormwater engineer to be investigated, and a report will be forwarded to Council in due course.
A question, is that Julie and Boatta, or is it Malunna and Boatta?
Malunna and Boatta.
That's right.
I think the issue of Julian and Boatta was raised in a subsequent meeting between myself and Mr Stevens attended that as well.
So if I can just clarify, Mr Mayor, the question as I have it recorded here is that Mrs Burgess of Lindisfarne asked, well, when will Council look at the problem of traffic at the intersection of Julie Street and Boatta Road and parking in Boatta Road and Malunna Road? So there was both junction.
I'd just like to raise that issue, Mr Mayor, and it's my understanding that well, that's right, it's to do with Boatta and Malunna. Julie Street was another question, that what has been read out then by the General Manager is what I received in the mail today, and which I have given to Ros Burgess, who's in the gallery this evening, which is word for word the Boatta and Malana Road.
Yes, but the parking issue also applies to the joint.
I did read out Boatta and Malana in the answer.
I'm just a little bit confused, Mr Mayor. I thought that.
Well, look, the formal answer will be tabled and included in the minutes. If there's any follow-up required, we're certainly happy to take that on board.
I might wait till question time.
Okay? Sure. Yeah.
Where it actually said that 2 crashes were reported, over what period of time?
Sorry, through you, Mr Mayor, I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to take that on notice. I don't know what the recording period is, but I think it's 5 years as we understand, but I will check that and confirm it through the briefing report if we can, please.
Any other further questions on that matter? All right. Are there any questions without notice from members of the public? There being none, item 8 is deputations by members of the public. General Manager.
Yes, Mr Mayor, we have one speaker this evening, Mr Mark Klopp, who wishes to address Council in relation to a planning and building application at 88 Mount Rumney Road. If you can come forward, please.
I do need to remind you that under the meeting regulations we can only offer 3 minutes and there will be a warning at 2.5 minutes.
Okay, good evening everybody. Just quickly, I just wanted to thank Council for giving us the opportunity to speak to this tonight. There's only 2 things I wanted to talk to in the application, and one was about the boundary setback and the reason behind it. Property exists, we bought the property years ago, and there's 2 existing quite large sheds on the property, and the reason for the setback variation was to relocate the new auxiliary dwelling and shed garage on the same sites. The reason being, we had a bushfire management plan done by a consultant, and our advice was that so it didn't impact on the natural vegetation and require any larger excavations or anything currently that the site has. That if we could build on that, those 2 sites, it'd be beneficial to everybody. I've spoken with Council in depth over the last 3 months to increase the setback. Initially that we went for 5 metres and we've gone to 7.5. So without making major excavations or alterations to the site, that's probably about the most we can move out to at the moment. The other one was we had, in the representation, we had a question asked about the additional dwelling. Basically the reason for the additional dwelling on the site is to house our elderly parents, and there's no other reason there. I think there was some concern that there's a business that runs adjacent to us on the neighbouring property, and we haven't spoken to those people, if it is those people that have made the representation, but we've got no objection at all to the business or any noise or anything that is created from next door. We've been there 10 months and we've had no issue with it, so I can't see that being a problem. No, that's about it.
Very much.
Thank you.
No further speakers, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to reports from outside bodies. Southern Tasmanian Council's Authority. The quarterly report is to be received. Alderman Chong, second Alderman Carr. Are there any questions on the quarterly report? Put the motion. All those in favour, that it be received. Against? Carried. Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority, Alderman Campbell.
Mr Mayor, the tenders for the C-cell excavations and the liners have closed and are now being assessed by the consultants and the board. So by the next meeting, hopefully there'll be a contract in place for the construction of the C-cell.
Southern Waste Strategy Authority, Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. The report is within the Council's agenda. And unless there's any questions, I seek to have it included.
Have a seconder, please. Will it be received? Thanks, Alderman Cusick. Any questions, Alderman Walker?
Yes, I have a question. We go to the financial report and we can see that the attached report shows the deficit for the year 31st December 2015 is 58,000 compared with 86. Yes, that's a smaller deficit, but a deficit's a deficit's a deficit. Really, this zombie organisation needs to be euthanised as soon as we can and rolled into STCA. It's just bleeding scarce ratepayer resources.
I'll just respond to that. Look, it's not a Alderman Walker. The fact of the matter is that this decision to wind up...
Through the chair, please.
Yeah, through the chair to Alderman Walker. To wind this organisation up, it needs a majority of the members of the councils that are obviously part and parcel of the membership of that organisation. So it may come to that, and I think that given there's only 2 months left in this financial year, and I've been advised that it won't necessarily be a deficit at the end of it, it'll be even Steven. So in fact there'll be a small surplus, and we're having a meeting in May, and one of the items on the agenda, Mr Mayor, is to discuss where we go from here and as to whether or not there is a majority of members of SWASA that want in fact suggest or recommend that it be wound up.
The recommendation is we receive the quarterly report for December. All those in favour? Against? Carried. There's nothing to report on the Tasmanian Water Corporation. Item 10.2, reports from council and special committees and other representative bodies. First up, the audit panel.
So moved, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Second, Alderman Cusick. Any discussion?
In relation to a reference to the General Manager's review, which is listed in here, I don't want any necessary detailed response, but it is listed as part of the audit panel's item 12, para 12. The council has submitted the following request, that the council requests the audit panel conduct a benchmarking review of the process for conducting a review of the General Manager's performance, along with how remuneration packages are reviewed, etc. Is there any developments at this stage as to whether or not there will be a report coming to council in relation to that? Through you, Mr Mayor, to our representatives. Thanks.
Yeah, as it states here, Alderman James, that the chairman of the audit committee suggested that there be discussion offline by the independent members of the audit panel, and that they will report back.
Any other questions, Alderman Bomberto?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. When will they report back? Will they report back at the next meeting of the audit committee?
Well, if that was determined at the meeting, I can check with the chairman and
I can answer the
General Manager?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the indication from the chairman was that they had to report back by June 30th.
Any other questions? Motion is that we receive the report. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Are there any other reports? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to present the March report of the Dysfunction Community Activity Centre.
Item 11.1, that the information in the weekly briefing reports for the 14th, 21st and 28th of March and the 4th of April be noted. Alderman Campbell. Seconded Alderman Chong. Thank you. Any questions on the weekly briefing reports? Alderman Jones.
Mr Mayor, on the 4th of April, this reference to 87 Delphus Road at Sanford. I've received a couple of calls in relation to this, and in the weekly briefing report, Mr Stevens has gone into great detail to cover a number of events associated with this. The acting group manager, asset manager, through you, Mr Mayor, if he could provide council with an update in relation to some changes to the roadworks. Through you, the gentleman concerned be able to provide council with an update, please.
Mr Mayor, yeah. Okay, so I put the motion that the information in those weekly briefing reports be noted. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. There's nothing at 11.2, so I'd now like to advise that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. Item 11.3.1 is a development application at 88 Mountain Road for alterations and additions to existing dwelling and new outbuilding and ancillary dwelling. Alderman Campbell, seconded Alderman Cusick. Care to speak? Would you like to speak to the motion as seconder?
Appropriate redevelopment for this property, 2.56 hectares. All representation issues have been satisfactorily addressed by council officers. The proponent has agreed, as he again told us tonight, to increase the setback with the ancillary dwelling from 4 metres to 7.5, and for our support.
Speakers? Alderman James.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I listened very carefully to the gentleman who spoke earlier. Look, on page 72 we have this question about the side boundary setback, and the acceptable solution is quite clear, and what is being proposed is 5 metres, although there has been a variation of 7.2, I think it's mentioned, that was, well, it was a change to that, but still within the 20 metre setback. Now, when I see this, and I think of other instances of where we have in fact been quite specific in our outbuilding setback. It may have been, it was under the old planning scheme, but remember, like for like has sort of translated across into the new planning scheme. And we have a side boundary setback here of 5 metres when the acceptable 7 metres, when in fact the acceptable solution is 20 metres. And the performance criteria go into detail in relation to building setback from frontage must satisfy all of the following. And I don't need to go through and read each and every one of them, but to minimise adverse impact, okay, on the streetscape, well in this case it's in a bush setting, but nevertheless it's still a reason for having the 20 metres. Be consistent with providing setbacks to the existing buildings on nearby lots, and be of no less than 10 metres, or if there is an existing building setback less than this distance, the setback must not be less than the existing building. Now we have a planning scheme and we have exceptions, and that's where the performance criteria comes into play. But I just cannot reconcile with the whole question of when do we allow in one case the requirement of 20 metres setback as per our SIPs, the Clarence interim planning scheme, and on other occasions we do not. And we very, very quickly jump onto those individuals who in fact disregard, and some of the consequences is this council becomes the proponent to take it to a tribunal and beyond. I'm not saying that this is a blatant case of for reasons being that there is a need of a setback, but I'm trying to reconcile in my own thinking as to why we make exceptions in one case and not in another. And on this setback, I am determined to, I suppose, make the point that if it's good for one, it's good for another. And okay, there may have been circumstances in this other instance which may have led to council saying, yes, this is the case, this is within the scheme, and you are not to deviate from it. And if that person did deviate from it, then the council, with all its might and its vigour, took it to the next stages, and it became an issue which I know that it did have some impact on the husband and wife relationship. So nevertheless, the fact of it is it's outside the setback. It's quite specific under the acceptable solutions, and I'm convinced the performance criteria are in fact quite definite and specific in why, in my view, I don't think it's appropriate to deviate from it.
Mr Mayor, Alderman James posed a rhetorical question, and that rhetorical question is, where do we consider that we allow a deviation from the setback, and where do we consider that we don't? And the answer is, the setback is an acceptable solution. Where we agree to deviate is when it meets the performance criteria. And that's the way our planning scheme works. And as a planning authority, we cannot deviate from the scheme. We must adhere to the scheme. Now, saying that there should be circumstances, or arguing that this is one of the circumstances where we can't accept that it doesn't comply with the setback. If it complies with these performance criteria, that's an argument for changing the scheme. But as a planning authority, we're dealing with the scheme as it is. And what I didn't hear from Alderman James is where he considers that it doesn't comply with the performance criteria. It has regard to the landscape because it's located within a clearing. There's no adverse impact on the streetscape because it's low visual bulk, single storey. It is in a bush setting. I guess we can be confident, I don't see any examples necessarily, but I guess we can be confident from the planning officer's assessment that there are buildings with similar setbacks within the area, so it's consistent with those. And then there's a fourth point, which is it's actually replacing an existing building, a larger or two larger buildings that have a smaller setback than the ones that are replacing them, which should actually be considered an improvement. So once again, I go back to my point that regardless of how we personally feel about a development, if we're going to make an argument for approving a development that's recommended for rejection, or rejecting a development that's recommended for approval, we have to make a very strong argument that is in accordance with the planning scheme that we are dealing with. And I don't see any reason for rejecting it on the basis of the performance criteria when it fails to comply with the side setback.
Mayor, look, my speech will be quite a little bit shorter after the points raised by Alderman Pugh. Page 74, page 72 rather, was previously quoted by another alderman around the table, and it was a little bit of the, it was a little bit about it. was sort of as it went along, but if you like, the crescendo or the final 4 points have been paraphrased by Alderman Hume, so I no longer will be reading them out verbatim. They're the reasons why to go ahead. Noted as 5 metres in the documents here, 7.5 now. So we asked the question, if the acceptable is 20 and this is only around 7.5, why is it before us? Well, that's the reason it's before us. It's not a tick and flick. At 20 metres away, we probably don't even need to know about it. But here it is, wanting some guidance, and some good reasons have been put forward as to why it should go ahead. Now, I'm up at any time to have a discussion about councils abusing their powers and being heavy-handed. And it is in the DNA of componentries of what councils do, but it's not around sheds on people's land. It's around taking people's land off with low-level thresholds and just expecting
the subject, please.
I'm explaining why, in this case, it is manifestly reasonable to vote for this motion before us. I seek support of others.
Other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Campbell. Okay, the motion is for recommendation for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? Carried. (11.3.2) is a development application at 43 Emmeline Court, Rugby, for a dwelling. Alderman McFarlane. Thank you. Second, Alderman Pearce. Alderman McFarlane, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just that I think this is a very nifty little infill development. I understood some of the comments from the representatives, misunderstandings of what was actually happening, but it's quite clear that they are actually building a separate dwelling and not adding another shed. So it's quite a nifty little spot to put one.
Yes. Other speakers? Okay, so I'll put the motion for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 11.3.3 is a development application at 43 High Street, Belrive, for a deck. Alderman Campbell, second Alderman Hume. Thank you. Would you care to speak to the motion? Any other speakers? Alderman James.
I only want to make a couple of brief points about this, Mr Mayor, and I have approached my colleagues, Alderman Doust and Peers, in relation to this, because I understand that the representatives met with them last week, and I know that we all received a letter from the representatives in relation to this. The question that I did have was in relation to the increase in the height of the finished floor level and modifications to the deck. And it appears that one of the comments that was raised by the representatives was in fact to do with privacy, and on page 97 it referred to the scheme compliance, etc., accuracy of the plans and noise. The question of privacy is dealt with under the acceptable solutions under 10.4.6A1, and I'm still at odds to understand as to whether or not having the proposed glass balustrade on the eastern side and the height of 1.8 metres is in fact able to address the concern of the privacy matter, because under 10.4.6 it's the acceptable solutions goes into great detail that has, and it's all spelled out there on page 101, and what is being proposed by the applicant is an increase in the height of the finished floor level of the deck is proposed. It is also proposed to increase the setback of the deck from approximately 2.3 metres to 2.9, as well as modify the deck screening. So look, it would have seemed as though that the screening is in fact been addressed, and it's my understanding that that's been taken into consideration. It's just that by bringing this deck up to a certain level, that it's going to still impact on the privacy of the adjoining property. And even though there has been some, it has addressed the actual screening on the deck, on the increase the level of the deck, it just seems to me that the elevation of the deck will still impact upon the privacy of the adjoining property.
Thank you. Alderman Dowse.
Mr Mayor, Alderman Pez and myself actually met with a representative on this, and he was quite willing to compromise on the situation, and we called one of our council officers in, and he discussed it, and he said that he didn't want it developed. All he didn't want the glass screen because it was lack of privacy. He didn't mind the development at all. And the officer said, well, I'll modify it and amend it. And if you've got any objections, contact me by last Wednesday. And he obviously hasn't contacted the officer, and this is the amended, and he was quite content with the amended plans as put forward by the officer. So I don't think there's any issue here regarding any of the objections, because they've been resolved.
Thanks, Alderman Dowse. Other speakers? Motion then, recommendation for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.4 is an application for 126 Roaches Beach Road, community meeting and entertainment, brackets church. Alderman Farm, second Alderman Walker. Would you like to speak?
Just supporting the recommendation.
Thank you, Alderman Walker.
Yes, look, it's a pragmatic and sensible outcome. I support it.
Other speakers? In that case, I'll put the motion recommending approval with subject to conditions of advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.5 is a development application at 314 Tranmere Road for 3 multiple dwellings. Alderman Farm, thank you. Second, Alderman Cusick. Speakers? Alderman James.
I would like to refer to the setbacks. And I take my colleagues' advice in relation to what the planning officers in this place need to consider in actually making their recommendation, and but it still concerns me that we are, in this case, where the acceptable solutions, and it goes into detail about the setbacks and the building envelope of all dwellings. And Unit 2 will have a maximum height of 6.6 metres at the northwest corner, and the roof at that 3.1, which will result in a small portion of this roof being outside the building envelope at this point. Even though it's small, it's minor. Again, in the acceptable solutions under 10.4, privacy for all dwellings. Again, the acceptable solution goes into detail, and what is being proposed, a setback of 2.73 metres between the decks of units 1 and 3. Compliant screening is to be provided to Unit 1, but no screen is provided to Unit 3. And then we go to frontage fences to all dwellings. Okay, it may be considered only a minor matter, but again, this fence between neighbouring properties, 272 Clarence Street, for instance. This has caused enormous problems with the height at 1.8 in that particular case, whereas in the acceptable solutions, it goes into what is acceptable and what isn't. Now, how far do we go in this? You know, do we continually use our discretion to deviate from what is within the Clarence planning, the interim planning scheme? I just cannot come to grips with this question of acceptable solutions, performance criteria, and the subjectivity that, in my view, seems to give a tick in the box in order for us to use our discretion. And while I'm in this place, I will continually argue and debate the whole question of whether or not the performance criteria is in fact based on what I think a reasonable person would expect in a development that abuts or is close to their property. And in this particular case, there are three instances, what I believe are really important issues, and I don't need to go through them again. And in each case, it's deviating from the norm, and I'm not convinced that the performance criteria is in fact weighs up to give us, well, particularly myself, I can't support that, and in fact, I think it's basically moving away from what is intended with our planning scheme. I will not support the motion.
Mr Mayor, I'll go back to my previous point that as a planning authority, we need to look at development proposals and look at the question of whether they are in accordance with the scheme that we have before them. Now, I am unsure whether Alderman James is saying that the performance criteria we have are not adequate, in which case that's actually an argument for changing the scheme, not for rejecting this development on the basis of it. If we are going to reject a development, then we need to have a good argument in case that rejection then goes before the tribunal. We need to have an argument, and if Alderman James, as he says, believes that the performance criteria can be fairly subjectively interpreted, then if we're going to reject a development, then we need to have a compelling argument that forms the motion to reject that, so that when it goes before the tribunal we can say, well, this is why it's not in compliance with the performance criteria. And all I'm hearing at the moment from Alderman James on this development is he's uncomfortable with it, representatives are uncomfortable with it, and it doesn't comply with the acceptable solutions. That is not enough in terms of our planning law and when council sits as a planning authority to reject a development. There must be an argument in accordance with the performance criteria, why it doesn't meet the performance criteria when it does meet the acceptable solutions. The acceptable solutions are strict standards that when they are not met, we then start to look at the performance criteria, which then look at things like, well, how does this impact on neighbours? How does this impact on people? But you know, the interpretation has to be fairly strict, and we have to put a compelling argument before the tribunal. Otherwise, there's no point rejecting an application, because our case would just be thrown out if we can't have a reasonably arguable position in accordance with it.
I think it is important to point out that that in these debates, to save time, that we should be focusing on the issues at hand, in particular where we believe the performance criteria or the acceptable solutions are right or wrong or indifferent, rather than waxing on and taking on the planning scheme as such. I think we need to focus on the issues before us. If I could just leave that for the meeting, please. Alderman Walker.
Yes, I note comments from Alderman's previous on this matter. I note comments from motions previous tonight. I note recommendations as written in this report, and I note the complete and total absence of distributed, considered, discussed, alternate motions. Your Worship, represent but don't represent too hard.
The other speakers. I'll put the motion then, which is recommending approval subject to conditions and... Sorry? I beg your pardon.
Thank you. I understand the difficulty for some people around the table at times comprehending the changes to the interim planning scheme. So for the benefit of the members of the public, the planning scheme has changed and the community are not always aware of those changes, and for aldermen it is also difficult to comprehend those changes. So from my perception, this particular application comes within the standards that now apply, and this is commented on page 141 in the overshadowing comments from the staff report. For me, this has been something that I think the community failed to comprehend with overshadowing and privacy, that the scheme does not provide capacity to consider overshadowing of properties. In this one it's to the east, as the buildings are within the building envelope. So in context of evaluating an application like this, if the application fits within the building envelope, there are very little justifications for refusal. But within the context of this type of application in an area where previous planning scheme requirements actually indicated a single-storey dwelling, I think the council needs to educate the public as to what the changes are.
Thank you, Alderman McFarlane. So I'll now put the motion, which is recommending approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? Carried. 11.3.6 is a subdivision application at 843 Cambridge Road, a one-lot subdivision. Alderman Pearce, thank you. Second, Alderman Campbell. Alderman Pearce.
I think it's fairly straightforward.
Thank you. Alderman Campbell. Other speakers? I guess there's no need for right to reply, Alderman Pearce. I'll put the motion for recommending approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And that concludes our business as a planning authority. Nothing at customer service. Under asset management, 11.5.1, the Cambridge Master Plan.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Tom.
Second that, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Von Bertha. Would you like to speak to it?
Hallelujah. Long time.
Amen.
I'm well done.
Any other speakers? Okay. The recommendation is that we, the GM, authorise the GM to undertake community consultation. All those in favour?
Yay.
Carried unanimously. Under financial management, 11.6.1 is an amendment to the 2015-16 estimates by $180,000 on Alma Street. Thank you, Alderman Cusick. Would you like to speak to it, Alderman Von Bertha? Thank you, Alderman Cusick.
Mr. Mayor, the funds are available. They're coming out of reserves and been provided from the previous operation of the service.
I just wanted to ask how much is in the Commonwealth Programs Reserve at the moment?
Carter, are you in a position to answer that?
The balance does fluctuate, but last time I saw it, I think it was in the vicinity of about 1.6.
Then, all those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 12, Alderman's question time. There's nothing on notice. 12.4, questions without notice. Alderman Jones.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Again, my question through you to the acting asset group management manager. Are you in a position to provide us with an update on the roads that need attention, particularly around suburbia? By having, for instance, an area in mind, and it may fall within in the next round of roadworks, and that's along the Esplanade from Lindisfarne Village right to along to Rose Bay Esplanade. So my question is there a schedule of roadworks going to be provided to us, given that it's getting close to the end of the financial year? And off the top of your head, are you aware if there is any work to be done on the Esplanade at Lindisfarne and Rosny and Rose Bay Esplanade, please?
Extend on them, Mr Mayor. We'll provide a report through the weekly briefing report of those roads that are still subject to dig outs, reseals or whatever for the balance of this financial year.
Yes, either yourself, Mr Mayor, or through you to the General Manager. I was absent for the workshop in relation to a presentation, I think it was from STCA regarding waste management. I'm assuming that, is it right to assume that they basically made a presentation that they could adequately have that within the STCA portfolio?
That's the correct assumption to make. In fact, Mayor Vincent from Sorrel was chair of that group within STCA, and he came and briefed us at a workshop to the effect that the group was ready to be up and running 1st of July, I think, and put forward a budget recommendation which I believe has been incorporated into our draft budget for consideration.
Given, you know, financially constrained times of governments and communities alike, can I please get some enlightenment as to the merits of council's scarce ratepayer funding going into a duplicate, some would argue zombie service, to coincide with that, which is WASA?
Have you got a point of procedural?
Yeah, look, I do. I just don't like Alderman Walker's attitude towards an organisation that's currently in existence, Mr Mayor.
Have you got a point of procedure?
Yeah, the terminology that is used in association with SWASA, I think it's unbecoming.
Well,
I seek your leave.
I believe that his question was a valid question. Maybe not to your liking, but it was certainly a valid question. And General Manager, are you in a position to answer that? if not,
through Mr Mayor, all I can add is that we have had some draft rules of the STCA body forwarded to us, which will come, I think, for consideration at the next council meeting. And in the draft budget that's been prepared to date, I think I'm correct in saying Mr Barter will indicate if I get this wrong, but I think there is only a recommended funding provision being made for one body in the 16-17 financial year.
Mr Mayor, I do appreciate that answer. I couldn't ascertain anywhere in that answer the economic merits of continuing with a separate standalone entity.
My answer to that, Mr Mayor, is through that's a decision that council has to take. I think in terms of that, I would need to take that question perhaps on notice to provide an economic argument, but I think council has previously resolved to go forward with only one body, I believe. My recollection serves me correctly. So council have obviously formed that opinion at some point in time.
perhaps you can advise us how much is in the draft budget for the proposal.
Through you, Mr Mayor, my recollection is it's 30,000.
Thank you. Any other questions? Alderman Clarence.
Just one question in relation to a recent query from a sporting club
in relation to requesting some work from council which was contrary to the conditions of the lease. Just a general question whether sporting clubs are kept abreast of the terms of the leases just prior to the start of their season, whether that would be a practice that might be encouraged just to make sure they have no misunderstandings in the terms of their leases going into
look, through Mr Mayor, that's probably a fair point, given the turnover. We do run sessions with the sporting clubs from time to time in regard to the conditions of licences and or leases, but it's probably reasonable to assume that given the turnover in committees that they don't necessarily carry forward that knowledge and understanding of what leases and licences require. It's probably a fair point, something we'll take on board for consideration.
Thank you.
To follow up on my last question from the last meeting regarding timing of the lights, welcome college intersection explained.
Through Mr Mayor, I actually had a discussion this afternoon with the General Manager Roads at the Department of State Growth and posed that same question to him, and his response to me, as soon as we can get to them. But he wasn't in a position to give me a specific timeline, I'm afraid.
That was his considered answer, by the way.
I will add a supplementary to that then and add my dancing light to that list.
I've asked the asset manager to investigate that.
I thought it was a state responsibility.
With the state.
Thank you.
Alderman Chong.
No, thank you.
Alderman Hume.
Two questions, Mr Mayor, and I'll open with my pet topic. The economic development plan, is there a time frame yet for that going out to consultation? I understand we adopted a draft plan for consultation at the last council meeting.
Yes, there will be, but I can't tell you what it is off the top of my head. Generally, it's within 2, 3, 4 weeks of the council meeting. Now, that clearly hasn't been the case.
Mr. Tui, are you in a position to help?
No, oh, okay, Mr Tui is in a position to help. Thank you, John. I missed the body language.
Through you, Mr Mayor, it's been released this week on our website and will be also released.
Second question, Mr Mayor, federal election coming up. What's our process for council developing its wish list and putting that to the respective party candidates?
Well, I can make a few introductory remarks and I'll ask the General Manager to explain where I got it wrong. Essentially, we've been approached by one of the major parties at stage, and there'll be another meeting. Our approach has simply been to present the priorities that Council has agreed in terms of roads and infrastructure and other major projects, and basically, I guess, as a smorgasbord for the major parties to pick up on for a project that best suits their needs. Andrew?
Yeah, just to add to that, Mr Mayor, we've requested to put forward the Council's main roads priorities, and with specific emphasis on the 7 Mile Beach sporting precinct, given the quantum of funding that's needed for it.
Roundabout and Gordon's Hill
things
Road.
like the airport roundabout, and our roads priority, adopted roads priorities in order of the priority that Council adopted them. So there's the types of initiatives we've been putting forward when asked.
Alderman Cusick. Yes.
Regarding direct payments from the federal government councils, I know that's been done through the High Court, everything. Has any discussion been with these major parties that you've been talking about reviving that idea?
I'll answer if I may, Mr Mayor. The thrust of the question, if I understood it, was engaging with the major political parties in relation to the validity and legality of the Commonwealth making direct payments to local government.
That's exactly right.
Okay. That question, we're not pursuing that at the individual council level, but it is being pursued by the Australian Local Government Association with the major federal parties at the head office level, as distinct from individual councils putting the case.
Alderman Goplerto.
Mayor, would it be possible for us to actually have a briefing at a workshop in the near future in relation to...
Certainly can be arranged. So I know that the chairman and CEO have made an open offer that whenever a council would like to be briefed, that they'll come along and do that. So we can set that up if the aldermen are fairly interested. I've seen some nodding around the table, so we'll put that in train.
Mr Mayor, sorry, I know it's question time, but can I just add another one in the mix there? We've had
another question?
No, yeah, mine's a question too, but it's the other way. Sorry, just on that though, we've had a request from the Deputy Auditor General, who's also wanting to do the rounds of council, so I just wonder whether you'd be interested in hearing a presentation from him at a workshop.
All right. That concludes our open session of council. May I have a motion? Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Second, Alderman Thurley. Procedural motion. All those in favour?